Amir Sadargis directs and co-writes Traumatika. Sadargis previously made the film Two Witches, which starred Rebekah Kennedy, and also this one also stars Rebekah Kennedy. So, Traumatika, what's it all about? It is effectively a demon possession movie with elements of slasher kind of vibes and also a little bit of commentary on the nature of trauma. So the film is told in a somewhat non-linear fashion. It kind of jumps between time frames and spans, for the most part, around a kind of 30-year period, although we do get a kind of a prologue which actually takes place like 100 or so years ago. But the story focuses on this artifact which releases some type of demonic entity which is particularly fond of children. Now, we have the story where this guy decides he's going to open this artifact and it affects him, and he's already abusing his teenage daughter, played by Rebekah Kennedy. And this kind of demonic force then gets kind of transferred to Rebekah Kennedy's character, who, in order to spare her younger sister, agrees to sort of serve this demon and kind of be its vessel, wanting to try and find a kind of the chosen one, a young boy that this demon kind of particularly wants. And he goes through a few different ones, trying to find the right one. Anyone who's not suitable is killed off. And then we have kind of a couple of different time frames in the movie. That's all I'm really going to kind of say on the plot. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about what works in this movie's favour. So this movie is really kind of talking about the cyclical nature of trauma. How in many cases people who are the victims of trauma end up potentially causing trauma to other people, and how it's kind of this vicious cycle. That's kind of the theme of this film. Obviously this one includes the element of demonic possession and supernatural forces, but that's the underlying kind of metaphor behind this movie, I would say. And you know, there is evidence that that is the case. People who have been abused might end up being abusers, for example, things like this. So the movie has this kind of quite hard edge to it, where we do see some pretty graphic imagery, both implied and kind of fairly kind of brutal gore scenes in the movie as well. You know, right down to the abusive father sexually abusing Rebekah Kennedy's character, which isn't really shown graphically, but it's obviously implied that's what's kind of going on. Down to some kind of quite brutal deaths, murders of children, things like this. So the movie is definitely not going to be an all ages horror film, and it is done with a somewhat brutal efficiency. The movie's directorial style is quite sort of you know, it has this kind of frantic kind of movement which gives it this sort of deliberately jagged pace, is the way I would kind of describe it, where, you know, it has these kind of quick cuts where you're meant to feel like the ferocity of what's happening. I have some issues with it, which we'll talk about in the negatives, but I do feel the movie's directorial style does get across this sort of ferocity of the event which the movie is kind of trying to depict, and it doesn't shy away from the brutality of what's happening. And we do see some brutality on screen, and the movie, it's not the practical gore effects are not splatter all the way through the movie, but I think when we do see it, you know, it is done with you know, quite in an efficient manner, you know, really kind of getting across the brutal nature of what is actually kind of happening, and therefore quite effective. I think Rebekah Kennedy gives this kind of manic pixie vibe that she kind of gave in the Two Witches movie, and she gives that again here. Maybe she's a little bit old to be cast as the younger version of the Abigail character. Not quite believing she's a teenager in that scene, to be honest, but you know, it's only a short sequence. But yeah, she's pretty good here, and quite subtle acting in regards to physical acting. There's a scene, for example, where she is kind of visited by the police, and she's kind of possessed by a demon. She's trying to get rid of this police officer, but he's wanting to kind of come in and have a look, and it's like she reluctantly agrees, but the kind of like the wry sort of smile on her face knows that this police officer is going to be in trouble. So I could have quite liked some of the kind of the physical acting by Kennedy here. Some of the makeup effects I think are pretty good. I have mixed feelings about the demon who we kind of do see. You know, it looks demonic. It looks a little bit derivative, but I think, you know, fine. The demon kind of looks kind of cool, but a little bit derivative of what we've seen. But the gore effects certainly I think are pretty good certainly for you know, not a huge budget movie here, and there's some sort of fairly gruesome wounds and things like that, which I think are done to a good standard. I think the kind of the way this movie jumps through different kind of time periods, it's interesting. I think it keeps the pacing quite tight, because it does have each segment has a kind of a slightly different kind of element to it. For example, the last segment here, which is the one which is more in the more current sort of times, actually deals with a grown-up version of the young sister, which Rebekah Kennedy's character in the kind of the bulk of the film was trying to protect from her abusive father by effectively serving the demon. So it's her story in the kind of the last act of the movie, which she's now like, you know, in her mid-20s and stuff. So it's an interesting, you know, having these interconnected stories, but we see them through kind of different kind of sort of time frames here. Again, I have a little bit of an issue with it. We'll come on to it, but you know, I think it makes for a quite fast-paced movie in that respect, especially when you mix it in with the kind of the frenetic energy that this movie's directorial style kind of puts out on kind of screen here. So I do feel if you are down for the kind of the quite explicit content, there's a lot to enjoy in regards to this movie, and again having this kind of this commentary on the cyclical nature of trauma and stuff like that is an interesting one. So yeah, I mean, for a possession movie, it feels more brutal and more like a slasher in some respects, and quite sad, I have to say. There's definitely an element of sadness to this film. What doesn't work? So some of the things that I've kind of mentioned, I feel the kind of the way this movie is filmed, it sometimes uses techniques more akin to a found footage. Shaky cam, lots of kind of like hard edits, jump cuts, loud kind of like blurting sounds where there's like a jump scare, which I think sometimes, you know, it betrays maybe what could have been a more building up of atmosphere. Instead we have loud noises and jump scares for some of the scenes with this kind of like this wobbly cam kind of style aesthetic. I think is effective in regarding to making the pace of the movie certainly feel you know, quite fast in many ways, but at the same time it's a kind of a style which I think is somewhat overused. And although I don't know if I would say it's especially overused in this movie, you do feel the movie is taking a few shortcuts and almost cheats in a way, where it's kind of having these kind of sort of moments where you feel these scary jump scares come at a little bit of a detriment to what could have been quite an intelligent movie in some ways, and it sort of betrays that to a degree. The demon, as I've mentioned, who we kind of see here and there, kind of looks like demons you've seen in other films. Let me just say that. It's alright, but nothing that you haven't really seen before. There are a couple of acting performances, certainly in smaller roles, where I didn't feel it was quite hit the mark. Not terrible by any means, but I think there's a couple of scenes here and there where the acting, you could argue, is a little bit on the weaker side here and there. And one thing that kind of bugs me, and I've got to be honest with you, this might not bug other people. The film opens with a scene which takes place like part way through the film, and then kind of goes back and tells the story up until that point. And I hate that trope. It's not the end of the film, but it's like, we know, so at this point going into the movie, we know what to expect. And then the movie kind of goes back and we kind of know what's going to happen to this kid, for example. And where it's going to end up. So I feel when filmmakers do this, it sort of deflates the tension. Because we know the status quo, where it's going to end up. And it's one of these kind of like stylistic choices that I've seen, and I always kind of say, I just, personally speaking, I don't like it. I feel it deflates the tension because you already know what's going to happen at a certain point in the movie, so therefore you are kind of expecting it. So there's, whatever comes before that is no real surprise. You already kind of know where it's going to end up, so I don't particularly like that. I was also a little bit kind of like unsure on, is the demon controlling, or is it, are people doing the demon's bidding, or are they kind of compelled to, or is it just a kind of a case of they're so traumatized they are kind of doing this off their own back, but under this kind of duress of all this kind of trauma that's got on there. I don't really think the movie is quite clear about the extent of a demonic influence. There's definitely one there, but is it a case of things are being controlled, or you know, is it more of a influence, so to speak? And then I had to talk about the last act of the movie, which it ends up being a slasher film, and I don't know if it worked quite as well. I think the first 2/3 of the movie, despite some of the misgivings that I've mentioned, I still think worked pretty well. The third act, it's okay, but it's the weaker act, I would suggest. And then we're kind of thrust with the younger sister, now grown up, as our main character, who we really haven't spent a lot of time with. We understand the position that she's in, but it's effectively a new character that we're kind of joining for the third act of the movie. I don't know if it quite works. Overall, though, the positives edge out the negatives for me and make this one an above average movie. But I think there are some decisions here that prevent it from being a really good movie. So I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. It is worth a watch. I just feel there were, for me at least, some of the decisions that didn't quite work as well as they could have done. So 6 out of 10. What were your thoughts of using it? Please do let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.